Hello, everyone. My name is Oleg Kagan, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator with LA County Library. And I welcome you to Work Ready, Creating a Purposeful Retirement. Before we get going with today's event, I'll take care of some housekeeping, do the land acknowledgement, and tell you a little bit about Work Ready. So, if you can hear me and see the slide up on the screen, then you're good to go. However, if you're having trouble hearing me or seeing the slide on the screen, let me know in the chat and I will do my best to assist. If you'd like to listen to this presentation on the phone, you can do that by calling 1-669-900-6833 and using the access code 837-1328. 4690 and the passcode 123123. Additionally, automated closed captioning is available on Zoom in case you'd like to read along with the presentation. To enable that, you would press the CC button in your Zoom window. Now, you may have noticed that the mics and video for attendees of the program have been disabled, and that's so that everyone can focus on our presenter for the day. That's not to say that we don't welcome your questions. We absolutely do. If you have questions, please post them in the Q&A. That's the box with a single speech bubble. And if you have comments, you can post those anytime in the chat. All right, now it's time for our land acknowledgement. The County of Los Angeles recognizes that we occupy land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Quiche, and Chumash peoples. We honor and pay respects to their elders and descendants, past, present, and emerging, as they continue their stewardship of these lands and waters. We acknowledge the settler colonization resulted in land seizure, disease, subjugation, slavery, relocation, broken promises, genocide, and multi-generational trauma. This acknowledgement demonstrates our responsibility and commitment to truth, healing, and reconciliation, and to elevating the stories, culture, and community of the original inhabitants of Los Angeles County. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these ancestral lands. We are dedicated to growing and sustaining relationships with Native peoples and local tribal governments, including, in no particular order, the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino Tongva Indians of California Tribal Council, the Gabrielino Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians, the Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians Quiche Nation, the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, and the San Fernando Band of Mission Indians. To learn more about the First Peoples of Los Angeles County, please visit the Los Angeles City County Native American Indian Commission website at lanic.lacounty.gov. All right. And now I'd like to quickly tell you about the Work Ready program. Work Ready started in December of 2020 with the library lending laptops and hotspots at that time out of 20 library locations, now out of 27 library locations, and presenting virtual events just like this one on a range of work-related topics, from interviews, cover letters, resumes, like the basics, to career pivots, and programs just like this one. Since then, we've done over 50, actually about 117 events, and many of them are available on the work and career playlist via our YouTube channel, which you can access at any time and watch the plethora of content that's out there, seeing if there's something interesting for you or to share with people that are close to you that could benefit. The Work Ready program is made possible due to funds provided by the American Rescue Plan. Now, we do have a great event coming up for you next month. That's going to be on March 25th. That's a Tuesday. It's going to be 11 o'clock, and it's going to be Work Ready, How to Succeed on LinkedIn. Tiffany Dyson, who is a LinkedIn aficionado, will be telling you about how to identify your goals on LinkedIn, whether it's worthwhile for you to have an account, and craft a practical strategy for thriving on the world's foremost social network for professionals. I don't have a link for that event just yet, but I will have a registration link later on this month. I will just post the information for the event in the chat, and you can mark it in your calendar, Tuesday, March 25th at 11 a.m. Same bat time, same bat channel. If you'd like to learn more about our virtual or in-person programs, head over to lacountylibrary.org and click on the events link at the upper right-hand side of the page. That'll give you all of our events for kids, teens, adults, older adults, both virtual and in person. And of course, all library events are and will remain absolutely free to you. And speaking of events, here we are at Creating a Purposeful Retirement. And to tell us about doing this wonderful thing, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Recently retired herself, Karin Klein was an editorial writer for the Los Angeles Times for 22 years, covering education, health, and science, and has won many awards and fellowships. She is a graduate of Wellesley College who majored in linguistics and psychology, and then went on to graduate school in journalism at UC Berkeley. She's the author of 50 Hikes in Orange County and Rethinking College, a guide to thriving without a degree, which was published in August of last year by Harper Horizon. Karin has 3 grown kids and 1 granddaughter and continues to live in the family home in Laguna Beach with her partner Rick Shane, a semi-retired film editor, her 16-year-old cat, and 2 dogs. Her most recent projects have included returning to college to study for a certificate as an archaeological field technician at Palomar College. Archaeology has been a huge interest of hers since childhood, and this spring she has had the good fortune to see, I should say last spring, has had the good fortune to see 17,000-year-old cave paintings in Périgord, France. She has also created a monarch butterfly way station in her front and back yards. And with that entertaining and interesting introduction, I would like to bring to the stage Karin Klein to share with us how to create a meaningful retirement. Karin, the stage is yours.
Hi, thanks, Oleg. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I really appreciate your being here. I'm really eager to talk with you and hope I have some useful things to tell you. I'd like to start out with a quote that was something that helped me a couple of decades ago. It's a quote from the author Olive Ann Burns, who wrote the book Cold Sassy Tree, as well as other books. And this just really struck me, and it changed my life in a lot of ways. I can't say that I did what she said to do all the time, but I certainly turned my life a little bit more in that direction. So this is what she wrote. I'm convinced true fulfillment is living in the world one day at a time, savoring it, leaving today's disappointments behind, and borrowing no troubles from tomorrow. It's done not only by accepting life, fever, and things that go bump in the night, but cultivating love and new and old friendships, and especially by finding a new work or project that makes it exciting just to get up in the morning. And that's something that I think is extremely relevant for older people like me and like many of you who are either in retirement or facing retirement soon, or maybe a little bit in the future. And that's also terrific for you to start thinking about that now instead of waiting until you're 65 or 70 to do it. I have to admit that though this program is titled about retirement, I really would love to get rid of the word retirement. Um, I am no longer working at the Times, which I did for 35 years, but I have not stopped working. I have all kinds of new work projects planned, educational projects. And so my feeling is that this is not a time to retire just because we have stopped whatever full-time work we were engaged in at the time. We might end up working more hours depending on what we find out. But, the word retire, it means to withdraw and it means to seclude oneself. And I don't think this is a time to withdraw. And I don't think it's a time to seclude ourselves. There are people who will want to do that with their days when they don't have to show up at an office or at a laptop. Um, and that's great. If they find what really works for them, I think that's wonderful. It doesn't work for me. And I get the feeling that a lot of people feel a little bit empty. That's what a lot of people tell me. They don't really know what to do with their time. I hear them talking about taking on activities just to fill their time. And I guess that's better than not filling their time. But wouldn't you like your activities to mean more to you just that you're trying to make the hours pass because you don't know what else to do? And so I already have begun, it took a couple of months, but I've already begun starting on other writing projects. I got picked up by actually a new magazine for older women that is about to get started, and she's hired very, very top writers. I hope I'm one of them. To write for her. And it's not an AARP or women's lifestyle kind of magazine. This is a very purposeful magazine about being seen and heard as older women. It's called Provoked by Susan. And I hope you'll take a look at it, especially start looking in maybe a month or two, or you can look now and then see how it's improved in a couple of months. Once these new writers have come on board, my first piece will be about Mark Zuckerberg talking about how businesses need more masculine energy. I have some opinions about that, but I was an opinion writer for many years, so that doesn't stop right on the button. Um, so I don't really believe in retirement, or at least not at this point. I'm 71 years old. I have no plans to retire in the retirement sense of the word. I think of it as my next phase. And I think it's great for us to think of all of life as next phases. I think I see a lot of parents who are at a loss when their kids go off to college or after college, and they are empty nesters. And they sort of feel like, oh, my work got done. Now what? And you're not an empty nester. Your work isn't done. You're in a new phase. And with some planning and with some excitement, it can be one of the greatest phases of your life. A friend of mine was the co-author of a book about hospice care, and it's called Changing the Way We Die. And there are many, many useful things in this book. I highly recommend it. You can find it on Amazon and all the usual places. But the thing that I found the most eye-opening about the book was thinking about hospice as not just a way to die. It's really more a way to take on the next phase of your life, probably the last phase of your life. But that doesn't mean it's not a phase of your life. And they found that for many people who enter hospice, they live far longer than anyone expected them to at the start of it. Once they're removed from the medication, once they get more excited about things, many of them live a good couple of years. One of them wrote a book during those couple of years. They take on all kinds of projects and spend meaningful time with family, not just lying in a bed, but really being there in an active way. So just as that's another phase of life, we're in another phase of life. And if we're lucky, we have our health, which is the main thing that we need and that we always have to guard. But then we move on to new and exciting things. And that's where my book comes in. My book, which is called Rethinking College, A Guide to Thriving Without a Degree, is sort of meant mostly for high school students or college age students, right? But it didn't come from there. Where it came from was that I noticed older people who could not find jobs that were worthy of their skills and experience because they didn't have a bachelor's degree. They might have 30 years of fantastic experience in exactly what the job was that they were applying for, but they weren't even getting in the door because the companies had just put up a wall. If you didn't have a bachelor's degree, they weren't going to look at you. You might be 10 times more qualified than someone just out of college with a degree, but they didn't care. They weren't really thinking. It became an easy way for them to separate out applicants. And I saw older people suffering from this, and that started me on the thought of why do we have this thing about bachelor's degrees instead of whether you can do the job well? And so that's how I started writing about it for the LA Times. And then I started on this book because Harper Horizon wanted a book written on the topic. And fortunately, while I was working on the book, things started changing. Things have changed tremendously. I started thinking about the project in late 2021. And it took a couple of years to actually produce the book. But what I was thinking about was that we can change things so that employers don't need to just automatically require bachelor's degrees. We can change things so that people can develop the skills needed for great jobs. I mean, we're not just talking about any jobs. Um, and the thing that happened while I was working on it was that the world started thinking that way. This was partly a result of the pandemic when there was an employee shortage. It was also because companies wanted to diversify their workforces, and they realized that there were not enough Black and Latino students who were able to go to college or who wanted to go to college, who were nonetheless extremely qualified. And they started apprenticeships and they started traineeships and they started reducing the actual formal educational process part of it and taking on more of the training themselves. So when I talk to you now today, there are a lot more opportunities for those students, but also for older people because companies are less hung up on bachelor's degrees. And I'm starting to see more job openings that say we prefer a bachelor's degree, or sometimes they don't say anything. And sometimes I actually challenge them if I see it and I say, can you tell me why you're requiring a bachelor's degree? Is there some reason why someone who can't write very well or do this very well or that very well can't do this job if they have the right experience and skills? And sometimes they say, oh, you're right. And they actually change it. So I figure we all should start challenging away and make employers start thinking about this. Strangely, on the public front, the person who started this ball rolling was Donald Trump during his first administration. About 6 months after relinquishing his first administration, he signed an executive order that said that the federal government would not require bachelor's degrees for jobs unless they could show a reason why a bachelor's degree was needed or another degree. And that seemed perfectly sane to me. And then states started picking up on it. The first one was, I think, Pennsylvania, and Josh Shapiro signed a similar order for state jobs. We now have them in a bunch of states, and we now have them in California. California hasn't dug in as deep as it can, hasn't made as many jobs available as it might, but it's on track and it's starting to work on the idea of fellowships and apprenticeships and partnering with private companies, putting them together with public schools so that students can get the kind of training that they need for terrific jobs, which is how they do things in Switzerland. In Switzerland, people don't, for the most part, go to a four-year college. I mean, a lot of them do. It requires a very, very rigorous high school course and high grades on tests, on standardized tests. But what a lot of them do is their last 2 years of high school, they do take their core classes in high school and they work half time in the field of their choice. And then after they have finished high school, they are trained. They might need one more year of training, they might not. But here in the United States, to be a hotel resort manager, you have to have a bachelor's degree in hospitality and maybe a master's degree. In Switzerland, you went to high school, you did an apprenticeship, you came out, and maybe with an extra year of training, you're a hotel manager, just like in the United States. And it's like that for all kinds of positions. So when I started talking about this, I started realizing older people also have a stake in this, especially if you're trying to change your career from what it was to something new. Then you wonder, what can I do if I don't have a bachelor's degree in that? And that's why my book is useful for people of all ages, especially older people seeking their next career, seeking a more purposeful older years. I'm not going to use the word retirement, or I'm going to try to not use the word retirement. So, I used this myself before I retired from the Times. I have had this, as Oleg said, this long time fascination with archaeology. Started when I was a teenager. I didn't go after it for various reasons. Sometimes I'm sorry that I didn't. Sometimes I'm glad that I didn't because, I also wanted to have kids, and it's not exactly the kind of thing where you can easily have kids. You're sort of roaming all over the world and so forth. So there I was in my late 60s saying, gosh, I really love archaeology. And I had been looking for years at my local community colleges for archaeology courses, and one of them had one archaeology course. And I said, well, that's not going to do. So could I go back to college and get a second degree, a second bachelor's? Would they take me? Would I have to start all over? Would I have to take all those exams and do the math that I haven't done for 50 years or more than 50 years? And then while I was working on the book, I started realizing different community colleges, though they have many programs that are the same, that are common, like nursing and firefighting and so forth, to all or most of them. A lot of them have very special programs that are, if not unique to them, unusual for them. You won't find them at every community college. So in my book, I tell people how to go about finding community college courses that you might find a good fit with, that could work as a career for you. And I decided, hey, I'm going to start using this on myself. I'm going to see what I can find about archaeology because, to get another bachelor's and then a master's, maybe a PhD while I'm in my 60s, by the time I would be done, I was afraid that I would have to be the relic that everyone was digging up instead of the person who was doing the digging. So I just did a search for community college archaeology program near me. And it turned out that there was a community college about 50 miles away. Fortunately, I like to drive, so it's not a problem. It's in North San Diego County, and San Diego County is a hotspot for archaeology. There's a lot of it going on, especially because whenever people want to develop land, they have to have what's called a cultural resource management company along, and they follow along and they look for signs of environmental damage, but also of archaeological damage. And so there are these people called archaeological field technicians who do that work, who take charge of digs, who survey land for archaeology findings. And they had a 1 year program if you did it full time, and you could get a certificate and work as an archaeologist. And I thought, wow, that's so terrific. And there are so many of these programs. I'll be giving you a list of them later. Um, but now that we've bought into the idea that not everybody needs or should need a bachelor's degree, the reason I wrote my book was number one, to tell people the many reasons why. I mean, yes, on average, bachelor's degree holders do make more money, but that's not always the case. 45% of college graduates with a bachelor's degree are working a job even 10 years later that does not require a bachelor's degree, and the skills do not call for a bachelor's degree. So they're what we call underemployed. That's on top of those are the people who actually get all the way to their bachelor's degree. Between 30 and 40% of people who start at a 4 year college never complete it. And there was a study at Georgetown University that found that close to a third of the people who graduate community college, which is a 2 year program, earn more money than the average college graduate. So that's not to put down college. I think college is great. I went to it, my kids went to it. It's not for everybody, or not everybody has the money, or not everybody has the time to spend 4 years at it. So then the question is, okay, I'm buying into the idea that maybe I really don't need a bachelor's degree and maybe it's not the right thing for me. But then what do I do? Where do I start? How do I find jobs? How do I know which fields are available? How do I go looking? And the truth is, school counselors can't really help young people with that because they're pretty much trained to get kids into college. And what they tell most kids who don't want to go to college is you can join the military or you can do the skilled trades, like being a plumber, both of which are great things to do. I have chapters on each in the book, but that doesn't mean that that's all you can do. And I wanted people to feel that, short of being a brain surgeon or something, the sky's the limit. You can live a tremendous life without a bachelor's degree if you have the bravery, the willingness to be a little bit nonconformist to do it. At some point, a reporter asked me, gee, it seems to me that all the people in your book are very special in some way, because I have a lot of stories of individual people who have succeeded and had great lives. Not always financial success. Sometimes success is measured in other things, which is why we're calling this a purposeful retirement. It's why my book says thriving. It doesn't say succeeding or getting rich. I don't think those are the keys to a sense of purpose in life. Clearly, Olive Ann Burns did not think that was the secret to a purposeful life, or a life that made you glad to wake up in the morning. And I'm aiming for a life where I feel glad to wake up in the morning. You feel glad to wake up in the morning. You have things to look forward to that are very exciting. So she said, well, my feeling is that all these people had something very special going on, and that's why they were able to have these meaningful lives. And I thought about that for a second. And I said, when I think about it, those people were not special in any way, except to the extent that all of us are special in some way or another. What made them special was having the moxie and the bravery and the willingness to be unconventional to say, I'm not going to go that route. I'm going to try something different. And that's why they all did well. It was the one thing that marked all of them. Before that, they were just regular people. Some of them tried college and it just wasn't for them. Some of them didn't try college. They knocked around. It's not like they went forward and said, I know what to do in life and were, immediately went into it and became brilliant creatives or anything like that. They're people and they tried their best and they did a few things. But they had the bravery to say, I'm not going to let someone just guide me into the next step. And that's what you can do. You don't have to let someone just tell you what to do next, sit in a classroom, send out resumes, which these days is not a very effective way to get a job anyway. So that's why I'm here today, because the same things apply to you as you face your older years, your years without a full-time job that you have to show up at 9 o'clock or whatever time every morning. So um, some of the things that I talk about in the book, and it's sort of important in ways that with all of these things that you don't just go into it saying, I'm going to, I'm going to do volunteer work, or I'm going to do something creative, or I'm going to whatever. The idea is that you try to be purposeful about it. You try to find something interesting, okay? Because the first thing I'm going to talk about is volunteer work. And certainly that's something that a lot of people do after they stop their full-time work. There's nothing wrong with it. It's great. The world kind of, or at least America, kind of counts on older people donating their time. And one of the ways to live a purposeful life in our older years is to feel that we still contribute. We still matter. We still have something to give the world, and the world recognizes us for doing it. But what I think is less likely to be successful for you is to show up at the local hospital and say, Here I am. And they get a bunch of people into a room and they say, Here are the things that people can do. And here's the thing we want you to do. We want you to sit at the front desk and give people directions to where they need to go in the hospital. Now, if that's something you love to do, that's great. But isn't it better to find something that really excites you, something you really want to do? Maybe you invent that volunteer work on your own because you particularly care about things. And you go out and find the thing that is most interesting to you instead of having someone say, well, we can use someone to do this. It's the difference between being excited about what you're getting up to do that day. And it also can lead you into new directions. It can lead you into what might be your future career. So, for me, that's worked out a couple of times. I mean, my whole thing with archaeology is that I started out volunteering on digs and I loved it. It was very, very exciting to do. Then I didn't have the time to do it anymore. Now I have time again. Maybe I will end up volunteering. Maybe I will end up being a paid person in the field. I just love archaeology and want to do it. Another thing that I did was about 23 years ago, I became a volunteer at a local wilderness park, not really thinking of anything in particular, just that I loved nature. And I wanted to help with this park because it had just opened after being private land for forever. And while I was there, I got interested in the plants and the animals, and I started learning things. And I realized there were these people called naturalists who were more trained than I was, and they led people on hikes and they could go on trails that the public wasn't allowed on. And I thought, wow, that's exciting. I want to do that too. So I found out how to take the courses to do it, and I became a certified naturalist. And I started leading a lot of hikes. I created some new hikes to do for the Orange County Park System. And then, lo and behold, a publisher wanted me to write a hiking book for Orange County. So I wrote one. It's called 50 Hikes in Orange County. That was back about a little less than 20 years ago. No, the first edition came out in 2010, and then a second edition came out in 2016, and the publisher wants a third edition. And I have to see if I have the time for that because I'm pretty busy. So your volunteer work, if it's something that really engages you, can also lead you in very exciting directions. You don't have to know what you want to do right away. You have to take a step toward what you think you might want to do right away, and or at least see what something has to offer you. And then you can always leave it if it doesn't. Some of the places I recommend for young people and older people are places where you can go live for a while. If you have the freedom to do that, there's a series of camps for developmentally disabled people in the United States and actually worldwide called Camp Hill. And you can, one is in Santa Cruz, but they're all over the country. And you go live there. They give you free room and board, nice free room and board. You get your own nice room, and it's like a regular residential house. And the volunteers live with the developmentally disabled adults. They do things like biodynamic farming. They do woodworking. They actually sell the things that they create. They make all sorts of tinctures and herbal remedies that they sell commercially. They have professional bakeries and they sell bread. And the volunteers who live there work alongside the developmentally disabled and they learn how to do all these things. There's a lot of time for creative efforts. There's a lot of time for reading. It's a whole community that, in the case of a couple of people I've interviewed, truly changed their lives. One was a young woman who had not even a high school graduation, and she felt very lost. She was working at a fast food joint, and she said, fast food is not what I'm doing for my life. And she looked up residential volunteer programs and she went to Camp Hill. She loved it. She found what it is she loved doing, which is working with older people. She met her future husband there. And they moved to Germany, where there are a lot more social services for older people. And they're studying to provide those social services for older people in Germany. Germany, like Switzerland, is not as big on the bachelor's degree as the United States is. So you can do that there and they will train you. And she's becoming fluent in German. And this is a young woman who had been led to feel like she was a failure because she couldn't finish high school. She also, by the way, is a beautiful writer. So it's a matter of finding things about yourself that you never knew, that maybe the world never gave you a chance to know. In my book, there are also religious retreats where people live. You can stay for 6 months. You can live there for years and years and years. At Camp Hill, I talked to one volunteer who has lived there for 26 years. She now manages other volunteers. So you can work at organic farms across the world and they give you room and board in exchange for your work and people learn a lot. Some of them then go into that kind of farming afterwards. Some of them just learn a lot about different parts of the world. So that's also in the book. One woman trains rescue horses so that they can then be adopted by families that will keep them and take care of them. But people don't want to adopt horses that aren't trained. So she brings people in and they don't even have to know a lot about horses. She teaches them how to ride horses, how to take care of horses, how to train horses, and they live on her property. She only takes a few people at a time. But there are very exciting things out there if you have an idea of what you might like to do. You know, there are websites you can look at, they're mentioned in the book, where you can look up volunteer opportunities and you can mention what fields you're interested in looking at, and things will pop up. You need to be careful that you're not being abused or taken advantage of, that the work hours are reasonable. The organizations usually have rules about how many hours you can be forced to work, but sometimes the volunteer places or farms try to get away with stuff, and it's important to hold on to your rights. But there are a lot of opportunities out there. There are opportunities to travel the world and volunteer at hostels and volunteer at farms and volunteer at tourism places where you get your room and board and a stipend or something like that in exchange for your work. So, you know, I think we all think in terms of staying where we are. Right now, if I could, if I didn't have an 85-pound dog and, you know, and a partner who needs to be here in Southern California, I think that's something that I would be doing. That really excites me, the thought of seeing a new place, of really contributing something of myself. What I'm doing right now in terms of volunteer work is local. And what I want to do is I'm trying to start a program with the local food bank because our sense is that right now, given what's going on politically, that there are a lot of people who will not show up at the food bank who need food because they are afraid of raids and arrests. And so my thinking is, why don't we try to get word out in the community that they don't need to come out and that we will bring food to them? And I offered myself as someone who would bring them food because though I have several new writing and editing projects getting going, I also feel it very important to give something of myself. I would not be happy waking up in the morning if I weren't doing something to help others and doing something to help our current situation. So volunteering is one of the many things you can do. Community colleges, you can't, I made a list of the things that community colleges offer that you might not even have thought of. I mean, everyone knows about things like welding, right? We need welders so badly, and so on and so forth. And almost all community colleges are offering welding now. But they also offer things like video game design. And I talked to one person for the book who learned how to design video games. He decided he'd prefer to teach it than to than to actually do it. So he has students who are being very successful designing video games. And this isn't just about games per se that you sit and play. It's also companies are now training people through video games, essentially. They take people through a workplace or through an engineering place or through a laboratory, and they can virtually do all these things, which trains them well for when they actually have to be there. Court reporting is something that it takes about 2.5 years to study in California. Other states have much lower requirements. But the court reporters make a lot of money, especially in California, because it's not so much about what they do in court, it's about their ability to sell those transcripts to lawyers afterward. And so they take a deposition and they sell the transcript to a lawyer. They make a lot of money from that. They make 150 to $250,000 if they are selling their transcripts to people. And that's something you can learn in community college for very little money, or if your income is low enough, for no money, because we have a very generous financial aid system in California. You can do furniture making. You can be a sound technician, so you can enter the creative fields of doing sound for movies, for TV, for companies, for theaters, for all sorts of things. Fascinating field. There's a college in the Florida Keys that's located on an island. They have student residences right on the water that are incredibly affordable. And they offer degrees and certificates in all kinds of specialized underwater diving, marine science, seamanship programs. If you ever wanted to be an underwater welder and you learn how to do deep sea diving, that is an incredibly lucrative field. Those are sort of the rulers of the welding world, the underwater diver welders. There is beer making. There is winemaking. I was recently up at Allen Hancock College in Santa Maria, California, where they have their own little winery, and they gave me 2 bottles of their wine, and it's really good. And so and there's a winery industry up there, as there is through much of California, and people can learn how to do this for little to no money. There's forensic science, where you learn about, laboratory work on forensics, figuring out what the DNA is, what the fingerprints are, all the kinds of evidence around forensics. Farriers, those are the people who shoe horses. There's a community college in New Mexico that gives people certificates in being farriers. The ones that make it to like the racing circuit, make a lot of money. And if you love horses, it's worth doing. There's solar and wind energy as well. So I think that's about my so you also can learn a lot of things via YouTube. I talked to one guy who went to college to become a video editor. He hated it. He felt that they were trying to tell him what to do creatively and that he had different ideas. And he was a nonconformist enough to say, I'm going to try this on my own. I'm going to try being creative on my own. And he learned from YouTube videos. And now he has a series of YouTube videos out to pay it forward, to train other people how to do videos. He became a YouTube video editor for a guy who had a very popular series, has a very popular series of videos on, and he's his video editor. That guy helped him learn in addition. And so he was able to realize his dream. He came out of college, even dropping out of college, he owed $100,000 that he had to pay off, but he's making 6 figures now and he's really happy. Um, you can go into, as I mentioned, the creative fields. That includes being a chef, which you can learn at community college. I talked to one guy who went to an overseas chef school in Piedmont, Italy, because that was a cuisine he was very interested in, and it gave him international experience. He was able to sort of wangle his way into a job. He came back. He worked for as a chef for Cirque du Soleil, traveling the world. He came up with his own vegan food delivery service for children. Now he's working for the Nashville Music Hall of Fame, the Country Music Hall of Fame as a chef, making, again, really good salary, loving what he does, loving where he is. So there's one woman I talked to who was very interested in fashion, and she couldn't afford fashion school, and her parents were discouraging, and she went off to community college in Pasadena, and she took a sewing course, and that sewing course changed everything for her because she learned how clothing is constructed. And aside from being creative and making pretty drawings, you actually have to know how clothing comes together to be a fashion designer. And she became a costume designer, and she's worked on various TV series and some movies that she's felt very passionately about, some albums for rock bands. So too with the woman who studied cosmetics. She's very interested in special effects makeup. She did some TV series. She did albums for rock groups. She is now in Nashville, and she's doing it for country albums and for there. It's a very active scene there in Nashville, and a lot of people who are in the creative field have been moving to Nashville to do that. Um, Another thing you can do is apprenticeships. You can, and these are starting to be very popular. Companies are being willing to train people themselves to learn how to do things. And of course, we're used to apprenticeships being in the skilled fields, in the skilled labor fields, like electricians have to be apprentices. People in the construction trades have to be apprentices first. And it's a very successful system. But now they're more available for white collar jobs that pay really well, that are exciting and interesting. There's a whole program in Denver for doing it for students. And I talked to a couple of the people who are there, who they're in my book. And that man is trying to expand it nationwide. He wants a system very much based on what Switzerland does. But I looked up just for fun last night. I decided to look up apprenticeships in our area. And so I just, plugged in apprenticeships near me. So I came up with there are apprenticeships in cybersecurity, in financial management, to be a management trainee. So, in other words, you become a manager, you manage other people, you're learning how to do that. Doing public relations for Warner Brothers, policy and advocacy work for the Social Justice Learning Institute, to be a jeweler, a marketing apprentice for Fenty and Puma, a dog trainer. These are, do any of these appeal to you? They they're very interesting things, and you could get me to do a few of them, but I kind of find everything interesting. Um, so I'd like to move on to talking about what you can do yourself to get started on what you might want to do. How do you find what it is you might want to do? You certainly could look through my book for some ideas. It has a lot of different ideas, a lot of different fields. It names employers who are hiring people without college degrees. But there's also a lot about volunteer work. Don't forget about the people in your life. Thanks to Oleg for mentioning my granddaughter. I recently learned that my son also, who lives back in DC, is expecting a baby in July, and I will be going out and helping with that baby when the baby is born. And being with our loved ones is an incredibly important and enriching thing. And we have the ability to expand who that circle is. We can make our family bigger than it currently is because blood is only one part of family. And you can get out there and be with people. I'm doing that a lot more than I used to, probably because I had a full-time job and 3 kids. So I wasn't doing much of that. But now I am with people much more, spending time with them. And it's opened up whole new worlds for me. Just being friends with one person led me the other night to go to the Old Town Music Hall in El Segundo, where they were playing a Charlie Chaplin movie, Gold Rush, with live music from their 100-year-old Wurlitzer organ with this terrific organist, and you learn about. I had no idea how brilliant Charlie Chaplin was before I saw this and laughed my head off, and what is involved creatively in being an organist for silent films, which the organist explained to us. They don't just have some sheet music in front of them that they play. They are watching the movie with us and creating music as they watch it. These are the kinds of things that I never would have learned about if I hadn't expanded my reach of people and learned to reach out to more people by joining book groups, by making new friends, by joining hiking groups. The people are all there, and what they will give back to you what you give to them, and usually far more. So before I get started on what I think are ways that you could get started on your own life and making your own purposeful retirement, I'd like to know if there are any questions.
There aren't any questions in the chat yet, but I think we do have one that just came in. And then folks out there, now is the time for questions. So if you have any questions that have come up during Karen has been talking about, place them in the Q&A and we'll be happy to cover them. Let's see. Okay, so the first question here is, do you have resources for in music? Something I had passion for during school, high school, college, then worked in different field for 34 years. I never did anything further with music. So do you have any resources or thoughts about continuing or reigniting this passion for music?
It's actually pretty easy in the musical field, and there's a section on music in my book. There's one guy who started out just wanting to be in a rock band, and he ended up being an events producer for a very big events place in the Midwest. I think it's in the Minneapolis area. He loves doing events. He's in charge. He puts on these big rock events, and he's very good at managing all these things, even though in school everybody thought he was terrible at organizing anything. So he just loves this. He became a sound engineer as well. So I would say, go immerse yourself in the world, because what I have found is a psychologist I know used to call it putting yourself in the way of, which sounds like you're making yourself an obstacle, but it's not. It's the opposite. It's you put yourself in a path, and if you're in that path, even if you don't have any idea where you're going, you start noticing things, or things come to you. Yeah, it's not supernatural. It's just when you're there and you're attuned to it, you start noticing, and people start noticing you, and things start happening. So go listen to music, go to different places where people are doing what it is you want to do, or even if they're doing something different, you find out about something different, or they say to you, you engage them afterwards, and they say, hey, what I heard is this great program, or somebody's looking for this and such, or you can get training there. And it's in those informal discussions that great things happen. That's always what happens for me. One of the things that I'll be doing right now is ghostwriting a book for someone. This opportunity came from someone who was a former source of mine, who liked my writing and knew that I knew it's not even about any of the fields that I've covered before. But he likes my writing. He knows that I'm very responsible. He knew that this woman and I would like each other, even though we are, pretty. She's in her 90s, but we have a lot in common. And that's, who knew that would come out of nowhere? And it was, he brought me something he thought I wanted to write about for the Times. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. I left the Times. I'm not doing that stuff anymore. Here's someone you can contact. And he said, oh, well, since you're free, what about this? So, you put yourself out there, and you'd be amazed at what happens. Go look into courses at the community college. They're so
Mm,
inexpensive. And if your salary is under $80,000, I think for a family of four, your tuition should be free. The books are really the most expensive part of it. And
mm.
I've gotten pretty good at finding the cheap versions of books. eBay has been my pal. Um,
Yeah,
so
for music, I think you mentioned getting into the milieu of whatever you're trying to get into, and the community college is the perfect place because there's the music department and there's people practicing and playing, and then there's some libraries that rent out musical instruments. So it's not even
very
there,
good.
sometimes it feels like the outlay for starting and saying, oh, well, I don't know if I want to buy a cello. That's a substantial
No,
cost or
don't go
whatever,
buy a cello.
or a trombone or something. But you can get a ukulele relatively inexpensively, or a simple keyboard, just to start with, and then take, singing. You are the instrument. So, taking relatively inexpensive lessons.
You
Also,
know,
actually, I should plug what I have one more thing to plug about. There are free lessons for music online. I mean, they're videos. Los Angeles Public Library are friendly library system in the city of Los Angeles. On their via their Libby, you have access to something called Artist Works, which is videos of qualified musicians teaching various instruments. And YouTube, of course, has so many.
yeah, music is also, it's a good field to go into because it's
Mhm.
what I think of as a generous field, which is you come across people who love this. They do it for the love of the music. And because they do that and they're not doing it to get ahead and, be the biggest boss and so forth, they share. They are happy to share with you. They love being able to mentor. They love being able to help you. So by all means, go to a community college. It's not going to cost much. You'll be surrounded by other people who love doing the same thing you do. You learn about resources from your professors. You get a chance to look into different aspects of it. Look into being a sound engineer. Maybe being a sound engineer leads you to being able to be the actual musician. You don't know where it's going. Expanding your skills is always a good idea. But being in the creative fields do tend to be sharing fields, and it's really a great place to just go find people. You're lucky that that's what you love to do, and it's a very meaningful thing to do. And by the way, about the cheapest instrument you can get, strange to say, is a piano.
Really?
You pay for getting it into your house.
Oh, well.
You probably have to pay a tuner, but there are an unbelievable number of people who are trying to get rid of their spinets or
Oh,
upright pianos. And you look on places like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or similar places, and people are giving them away, giving
would have never thought.
or maybe they charge $100.
Mhm.
You've got to get someone to help you bring it home, a couple of really strong buddies, and it's going to get horribly out of tune. But you're not worried about that right now, right? You're not worried about having, a Steinway in your living room. But you bring
Just
it
something
in.
to play.
Yeah, you get a piano technician and tuner to get it into decent shape so that you can get
Mhm.
started. And then your biggest problem is what you do with it when you're ready to
Yeah.
get rid of it.
So Karen, I have another question. This is a really bigger question. What have been the biggest surprises about this phase for you, compared to what you've expected?
I thought it was going to be so much tougher. Really, I thought, oh, I'm going to go out there and I'm not going to find things, especially because when I left the Times, I resigned rather abruptly from the LA Times because of what I considered to be unethical goings on by the owner. And so it was a very sudden thing. After 30, this place had been my life, 35 years there. So I thought, I wasn't scared or anything. I knew I was okay. I was 71 years old. I've waited a long time and, I'll pull my pension. I have my savings. I'll be all right. But not writing, a life for me without writing just doesn't even seem like a life. And writing just for my journal isn't enough for me. I'm used to reaching out to others with my writing. So I thought, well, things were not in the best shape. There weren't many things around. I was trying things, they weren't working. In December, I kind of was spinning my wheels, just trying to get things done. They weren't getting done. I was
Mhm.
frustrated with them. I was frustrated with myself. What I really should have done was given myself a month off, which was what it ended up being because I didn't get much accomplished. So I
Mhm.
should have just enjoyed it while I was doing it. And then January came, and if you have enough faith that things are going to change and you just kind of keep at it and don't try too hard, just kind of put yourself out there, let word be known that you're there. I do use LinkedIn. Let me tell you, I will be checking in on that. It was March 25th, was it?
March 25th, yeah,
Yeah.
11
I'm
o'clock.
going to be checking in on that. I use it, but I'm sure that I do not use it as effectively as I should
Tiffany
be.
is very good. She's going to give some very good advice on that, how to succeed in LinkedIn workshop, yeah, in
Yeah.
March.
LinkedIn can be very, very helpful. I highly recommend LinkedIn. I highly recommend that if you want to move forward, you plug into LinkedIn and learn how to do it from Tiffany because it's a very useful place if you know how to use it. And I am taking baby steps. I am no expert at it. So, but what surprised me is then came January and all of a sudden this woman put out word that she wanted writers for her magazine. And I, being a sort of tough older woman who does not like people not recognizing that I have some smarts and something to say. This sounded like the perfect publication. We were an instant match. I wrote my first piece for her. She loved it. I'm sitting here going, this is so much fun. Why was I doing what I was doing? I should have left that a few years ago and started doing this. And then this book came along, and now I'm talking to a nonprofit that I very much believe in. Again, they offered a full-time job. I didn't want a full-time job. Their job didn't pay that well, but I love this organization. So I went ahead and
Mhm.
applied, and I thought maybe they have room for a part-time or whatever. And I talked to the guy and he said, well, we don't have the kind of money that someone like you makes. And I said, yeah, you're right. But, but you need someone to write op-eds for
Mhm.
newspapers. And that's a very special
That's a
skill. I've
skill
been
that you
doing it for
have.
the
See,
past 22
fits
years.
right in.
And, if you could use a contractor, if there's any way to fit in a contractor in your budget to do that one specialized thing for you, I'd love to do it for you. And I will give them a price that's not very high because they're a nonprofit and there's something I really believe in. And they are really interested in doing it. And they're talking right now about
Mhm.
whether they can do that, how they could do that, what kind of budget they can have for it. So it's sort of like, hey, it doesn't have to be exactly the right thing. You see something that turns you on, reach out, see what happens. And amazing things happen. I mean, I thought, oh, maybe there's like a 2% chance that they would respond to me in any positive way, but why not? It's
Why
just
not?
a talk with another nice person. So the worst that happens is we have a nice chat and we part ways.
Aaron,
Um,
so a couple of people have actually, you mentioned that writing is, what would life be without writing? I agree with you there. Um, so a couple of people, interestingly, have mentioned, wanted to know what the title of your book was. And that, of
oh,
course, is Rethinking College, A Guide to Thriving Without a Degree. But a couple of people said, well, maybe there should be a book called Creating a Purposeful Retirement.
that is true. And I actually, the strange thing was that as I was coming out with my book and I was posting on Facebook for my friends about things that I was finding out, more than one retired person said, you need to write a book like this for retired people. So
Yes.
I think that might be next on my list. There are a couple of book projects I have in mind, but I would love to do that for people because it's about more than just how do you have your finances in order or so on and so forth. It's about truly having a meaningful life. And obviously, when people are poor and they don't have any resources, that's very tough. But you don't need a lot of resources to lead a really meaningful life, to really be filled with joy about life. And we have that right. And thank goodness we are at a time in history when we generally have better health than people did. When I was a kid, 71 years old sounded so old.
Mhm.
I do not remotely feel old. And I'm still hiking away and now taking weightlifting because I realize I need to keep my muscles up. Keeping our physical health up is actually a really important part of this. Please do it. You don't have the energy for all those other things if you don't keep your physical health up, your fitness, your strength. Lift cans of soup if you don't have any weights around the house.
That's
Um,
actually a good idea. I mean,
yeah,
if you just, hold your arms out like this for a few seconds, that's already starting to.
yeah. I finally got in the habit of every time I have the microwave on for a minute because I'm reheating my coffee, I do these sort of like lame person push-ups off the counter because, hey, I'm doing something. I'm
Yeah.
moving my muscles. And this is about, an interesting thing about it is I think the whole way that you go about a meaningful older years, because we're not using that word, the is that you have to keep growing as a person. You have to keep stretching. You have to keep expanding yourself. And it's such a great experience to do that. It feels so good. And many of us haven't had a chance to do that for many years. We were keeping a household together. We were raising kids. We were working 9 to 5. We were really busy people and, maybe worried about things. I was always worried about the next set of layoffs at the LA Times. Thank goodness that's behind me. And then now we have the chance for the first time, maybe since we were very young to expand. And there's something that a personal trainer told me at one point, which is if you're working out and you keep lifting, reach a certain level and you keep lifting that weight, and it was a tough thing to get to, you don't actually not only do you not build muscle, you don't actually retain all the muscle that you had because your muscles are now used to it and they're not being challenged the way they were. You have to keep adding weight. You have to keep challenging yourself in order to maintain your muscle, let alone grow it. That's the same for our brains. That's the same for our lives. We have to grow them or we start shrinking.
Somebody mentioned in the Q&A, it's interesting. Did you know that statistics show that people who retire on purpose live 7 years longer?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep.
No, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. But I wonder if I'm kind of a bear about studies, and so I'm
Mhm.
wondering, does the ability to retire on purpose mean that those people have more resources
Right.
that enable them to retire earlier, which enables them to be healthier, to enjoy more things, so on and so forth. So anyway, the name of the book is, and you can get this at the LA County Library, and I think
I posted a link in the chat.
Rethinking College, a guide to thriving without a degree. And like I said, you can get it at the library. It happens that right now, Amazon, my publisher just told me last week, Amazon put the Kindle version on a 90% off sale. You can get it for $2.99.
Wow,
So yeah, for $3, you
that's
might want to
wild.
get your own, you know.
Yeah, that's a
Say
good
go
deal.
ahead, go buy the hard copies. Though I'll be very happy if you do, but those are like 23,
Mhm.
$24. But
Yeah,
for $3,
that's worthwhile.
I'm actually buying a few and sending them to friends just so that they can have
Mhm.
it because, $3. I
Yeah,
mean, so
that's like a cup of coffee. It literally costs an espresso.
yeah, yeah. Actually, my local coffee place charges more, but
Now, yeah. Well, you can never depend on it. So we had a good question here, and you mentioned your age a couple of times, but the question is, a lot of what you said sounds very interesting, but what about those of us over 70?
I'm over 70. I'm 71. And
How about
my
those
partner
of
is
us over
78.
85?
You know, we have to be real about things.
Mhm,
Okay. There are a lot of 85-year-olds who are, like I said, I just met this woman who's 92, the one who's interested in having me ghostwrite a
mhm.
book for her. She was incredible. She had me come over to her house. There were two other people there. She said, "Oh, I'm going to give you an early dinner." I thought, what, she's going to give me an early dinner? She's going to like maybe have something brought in, right? She's going to have someone cook it. No, she cooked a dinner. And then we were involved in a very deep discussion of all kinds of things at the table. And I kept offering to help. It's like, what can I do? No, no, you can't do anything. And she's cleaning up. And I'm saying, let me help you. Let me clean up. She wouldn't let me move the dishes off the table. She said, no, you're having an interesting conversation. I love that. I'm listening to your conversation. She cleans up the whole dinner while we're there. The kitchen is spick and span by the time she's done. She is a very active woman. She is involved. She has people over to her house. She loves interesting conversation. Um, she has a tennis court on her property. She's lucky enough to have that. She actually had bought it because her son was a tennis player at the
Mm.
time. That was why she bought it. Had like almost no house, but it had a tennis court. And her son needed it to practice. Um, she's extremely active. Not all of us are that lucky. My partner is
Mm.
78 years old. He still does film editing. He teaches at USC. He goes hiking with me. We did a 35-mile hike in Ireland last year. It was my first time
35 miles.
ever in my life. I'm talking about expanding my life. Yeah, a 35-mile hike. And he did better than I did. I was fine in musculature, but I had though I tried to plan for the right shoes, I had the wrong kind of shoes. The things I tried to do to fix it only made it worse, and my toes were getting rubbed raw. And
Mm.
the last couple of miles, I was literally in tears. Someone offered me a lift and I wouldn't take it. I said, no, I'm doing this whole
But
thing.
35
I don't want
miles
to come
is
out of this and say that I took a lift from anybody. I am hiking the whole thing myself. So it really depends. We're not all blessed with good luck and good energy at the age of 85 plus,
mm,
but then we find the things that we are blessed with, a good brain. I mean,
mm.
I'll always be able to write if I get to the point where my fingers are arthritic and I can't type on my laptop, which is like hard for me to imagine because yeah, I can, these days you auto transcribe,
Very good. It's
yeah,
gotten
it's
so,
gotten
so
very
much better.
good. So, we can always find something we can contribute to somebody else, even if it's one of the things I did that I meant a lot to me was this was for a friend's. aunt who the friend lived far away, but the aunt was in a nursing home after a stroke.
Mhm.
And I would go over there once every couple of days and I would read to her. And it was really the only kind of intellectual stimulation she was getting at all. It was the only interaction besides someone coming in and saying in a chirpy voice, "Well, how are you doing today, Sophie?" And I know that it meant a lot to her. Most people can go to a nursing home and read to somebody for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it is. It
Mhm.
makes their day.
Yeah.
Whatever you have to give can be meaningful. Meeting a new person is meaningful. So, yeah, will I still be able to do these things at 85? I don't know. One of my
Mhm.
kids asked me, and she paid me the greatest compliment. She said, "Mom, I was 70 at the time. She said, "Mom, you're so young for your age." And I said, "Ah," she said, "No, I don't mean physically, though physically you're fine, but I mean like you think like a young person, and that's a really great thing." And
That was the thing that I loved about your book, The Rethinking College, because initially, you mentioned that the audience was supposed to be people who were just coming out of college, kind of early career, etc. But really, the book is all about keeping an open mind, keeping the possibilities happening. And if somebody who's older, getting to their unretirement, um, getting to their next phase, and are able to keep the possibilities open, which is what it seems like you're doing, that seems to be the key.
right, right. And sometimes we do have to shrink our expectation when our, physical ability isn't up
Hmm.
to it or so on and so forth. I mean, I don't want to be like, super rosy and say we're all going to be great till the age of 115 and, and hiking up
Mm.
mountains.
35
I
months.
don't, I don't think I want to be hiking up mountains at that point, except in my mind. But, but my daughter asked me when we had that talk, she asked what probably was a difficult question for her. And she said, "Are you afraid of dying?"
Hmm.
And I said, "Not really, and to tell you the truth. Now, that doesn't mean that if I get a diagnosis of a terminal illness, that I won't turn into an anxious mess. I am not trying to pretend to that kind of Zen calm. But right now, I'm too busy living and looking forward to the stuff that I'm planning to do and that I'm already doing to think about that. Just like when you're 40, do you sit there and think about, well, gee, why don't I be afraid about dying? I mean,
As a 40-year-old,
yeah, very few of us can,
no.
yeah, very few of us can deal with that when it's staring us right in the face and it's an immediacy. But why should I have to think about it more than a 40-year-old? I did
Mhm.
scare my older daughter yesterday because I said I was finding things because I was doing Swedish death cleaning, which is a
Oh.
tradition among Scandinavians where you clean, it's basically clutter cleaning. You try
Mhm.
and leave for your next generation that they won't have to sit there sifting through 10,000 things, which is a very difficult
Mhm.
thing to do. And she absolutely panicked and she said, "But you're healthy, right?" And I said, "But if I were sick, I swear to you, I would tell you kids that I'm sick."
It would be hard to do a Swedish if you're not feeling well. I mean, you have to be at
Right.
some level of activity and movement to be able to do that.
Right. I said people don't Swedish death clean when they are facing death. They do Swedish death cleaning long before. And
Yeah,
I will
preparation.
probably, yeah. And I said, and I will probably have to go through 2 or 3 cycles of it, and I'll still be doing it in 25
Mhm.
years. Okay, is that good enough?
We had a question in the chat actually speaking of talking about like movement and just general kind of disposition. I'm curious if you have found that whether introverts or extroverts have a more difficult time adjusting to retirement. Or if there's a distinction, I think it's some sort of a speculative question.
I'd have to speculate on that. And I will say that although probably won't believe it from all the chattering I've been doing, but I'm actually an introvert. Um, I love social interaction, but after the social interaction, I have to go hide in a corner.
Mhm.
Okay, that's my thing. Introverts are not people who don't like being with people or don't like social things. It's that extroverts are fed by social interaction. They gain energy through social interaction. Social interaction drains energy from me. I love doing
Mhm.
it, but when it's done, I'm really tired and I need my
Mhm.
alone time. Unfortunately, my partner now understands it. I'm not rejecting him, but I need to go hide in my study and write in my journal. And yeah, my wild guess is that that those years are easier for introverts because introverts have learned more about entertaining themselves. And while we can be more social and we can do all these things, it's not always easy. Not everybody has that within their circle or within their grasp. Sometimes it takes quite a bit of effort to do that. Whereas the introvert will just sit there happily with their books and their projects and their journals and their musical instrument or whatever. I mean, they still need some human interaction, but they can spend a lot of time entertaining themselves.
Mhm.
So again, that's just a guess, but I think it's a pretty good guess. I don't know. What do you think?
Having extensive and deep internal architecture is helpful for any part of life. We all have to wait in line and we have choices. We can death scroll on our phones or doom scroll on our phones while waiting at the DMV, or we can be thinking about stuff. And so it's helpful to be able to have some stuff going on, interests going on, that you're able to carry out. I think whether you're 40 or 85. So yeah, I don't know if I don't know if the deciding factor is introversion or level of extroversion, or just having what you're talking about in the beginning, having things that you're interested in.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the key. You can be an extrovert, but if you are interested in things, then you're in an easier place. And
Mhm.
I don't suggest waiting till you're 65. If you happen to be lucky enough to be in your 50s now, now's a great time to start thinking about that, start planning for it, start your additional activities. I did
Mhm.
know enough to develop my additional activities before I left the LA Times, before
Mhm.
I knew I intended to be working for them this year. That was the
Mhm.
plan. Um, so, but it's good to get going on those other things and they feed you. They give you something that your work isn't giving you and that your current life isn't giving you. A new interest, you feel like a bigger person, a more interesting person. And
Mhm.
really the key in the end is both for employers, for colleges, and in general, to be an interesting person, be an interesting person. So then kids who are in high school say to me, how do I be an interesting person? And my answer is by being an interested person. If you take interest in the world around you, if you find things to be really interested in, if you start noticing others and what they're doing or what's going
Mhm.
on around you, and you engage with that, then you become an interesting person.
So we have a question, and I think that it, in some ways, kind of fits in from this. The question is, you spoke of moxie and bravery. And do you have any advice on how to overcome the fear of trying new things? It's almost the fear of becoming an interested person in a way. But like
Yeah,
trying it, being going out, going outside of yourself to pursue your interests.
it's not an easy thing. And I feel the same fears as anybody else. I've done a lot of not doing things I should have done because I was afraid. Um, I last year, my very, very favorite musical group, I really like chamber music, and there's this group called the Danish String Quartet that I'm just crazy about. And they did two concerts, and the second one was they do traditional music up to the level of classical music, and they did it in an event center.
Mhm.
And I've just followed these guys for years. I mean, I go up to, they usually perform in Santa Barbara, and then
Mhm.
they come down to Orange County. I go up to Santa Barbara and watch them perform. The next morning, I drive down to Orange County and again that night. And there they were drinking beer after their performance. And my partner was saying to me, well, you ought to go talk to them. You ought to go talk to them. I'm like, no, 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 I can't do that. I wouldn't know what to say. And he sort of dragged me over and said to the
Mhm.
guy, well, this is Karen, and she's one of your biggest fans. And that reminded
No,
me of
no
that.
lie.
Yeah, and that reminds me of that horror book Misery, where she says, I'm your number one fan. And I thought, I'm probably going to run in the other direction. But I ended up getting through it and it ended up being wonderful. I think what you do is number one, accept that it's not always going to work out and realize it's not a tragedy if it doesn't work out. It really doesn't matter. God, the things we worry about, I worried about them all my life. I think it about in my early 60s when I'd faced enough weird things in my life to realize what mattered and what didn't, that I realized that doesn't matter if I try something and it doesn't work out. And maybe, I could think of myself as an idiot if it doesn't work out. And even if I am an idiot, who cares? It's me. I'm doing my own thing. And I feel better for having done it, even if I ended up being an idiot and even if it was an utter failure. Um, just try and maybe try something very small. Maybe try something very unchallenging. For me, big groups are very challenging. That's the introvert in me coming out. But maybe try a conversation with one person. That's a challenge. That can be a challenge for a lot of people. Take a class. Boy, you think I wasn't scared to go back into the classroom? And here I am, this white hair in a classroom full of, the oldest person was like 35 years old. And, they kind of looked at me a little bit at first, but then I actually became friends with them. And they were so helpful to me, those young people, because unlike many older people, my tech skills could use a little brushing up. And then, they were just incredibly kind and good. And, and I made friends there and met great people and learned how incredible a lot of community college students are. I mean, these are people who are taking their studies very seriously while they work full-time jobs. They're amazing people, and our society does not have close to enough respect for them. We tend to think of community college as the also-rans. Let me tell you, these people are not also-rans. They are going places because they have initiative and they know how to work hard and they are dedicated. They are going to be great.
As a former community college student, I co-sign that wholeheartedly. My fellow students, where I was there, were from all walks of life, various ages, and going places. So we have another question here. This is one last question, and then we'll close up here. And this is a pretty wide-ranging question, and we may have to generalize it a little bit because it might be hard to focus without having an actual conversation with this person. But so the question is, hello, I'm an introvert that left my former bank job in December of last year. I have 4 years until I retire. I'm trying to figure out what to transition to. I don't want another desk job. Any suggestions where to look for skills that are transferable or that I can transfer to?
Well, I mentioned a lot of things during this talk that
Yeah,
that
sure.
are along those lines. And I do, I'm not trying to pump my book here. By all means, take it out of the library if you don't want to spend the money on it. But it has a lot of suggestions in there. And a lot of them are things that are not sitting at a desk. In fact, most of them are
Mm,
not sitting at a desk. So it's very possible, it's maybe getting a job even in field archaeology might be a little bit challenging, but one of my professors said to me, one way you can get a job doing that is you can, they're always looking for people who can write because you have to write these reports.
mm,
And usually these people do not like writing. So if you are someone who can write, they will really like want to snap you up. So maybe I use my writing as a way to sort of get jobs that enable me to go out in the field most of the time, but sometimes I come in and I do writing for them because that's something that comes very easily to me. So go from your area of strength, go from what it is you know, and move into something, but say what I bring to this also is this history doing this, this, and this, and this. And they might be
mm,
very, very interested to add those skills to what their people do because a lot of their people probably don't have those skills, but there are a million things to do. I talk about a ton of them in the book. There are
mm,
tons of them. Where I can, I mention specific companies that are hiring without a bachelor's degree. I mention how to become a creative writer. How do you go into the film and TV world? To the extent that I can, I try to be very specific. Where do you find these great volunteer activities, so on and so forth?
mm.
For your 4 years, if you don't need to actually earn money, but you need to just be able to get by, being a residential volunteer might be fantastic because you get to have a new experience, you get to build new expertise, you get your room and board taken care of. You know, it's all those possibilities are there. Look at what your community colleges offer and just take a look at the whole catalog because they will tell you things like, I had no idea you could get a job by studying, you know, Native American studies, which is a fascinating field to me and very closely related to archaeology. But who thinks there are actual jobs in that? Well, guess what? There are jobs in that.
Karen, thank you so much. This was fantastic. I want to read a comment that just came in. Karin Klein, you've really spoken to me today. Everything you've said has been what I've needed to hear. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. That made my week, my month, quite possibly my year.
There we
Um,
go.
if Oleg ever wants me to come back to do more, I would be happy to do that. I'm happy to share with you all. So
Thanks, Karen.
This
And
is
for the
Nashville. Thank you. Thank you for your lovely reception, and thank you, Oleg.
Sure, and for the folks out there, I do have one small request. I'm going to post a post-event survey in the chat. If you could fill that out, it's a very short survey, but very meaningful to us who plan these programs. I read all the surveys and sometimes I respond to them. And once again, Karen, thank you so much. And thanks to the folks out there for being with us here, for asking the questions. And we will see you next time.